My name's Robert Pratton, and I create adventures. In fact, our company mission... Thank you. Maybe this is better? No, I don't think so.
Hola. No? Hello? Hello? No? Hello? Hello. Now.
Look at that. So, I'll say, just while we're getting that, can I have a quick show of hands? How many people here plays computer games? Put your hand up if you play computer games. Okay, that's pretty good. That's much better than it has been on previous audiences. So our company mission is to make everybody's life an adventure. And the way that we do that is by creating immersive experiences that blend with the real world. So we go about our everyday lives and we tell a story across multiple platforms, and we rely on your imagination to connect all of these different pieces into this immersive environment. Now, our core business is licensing this software as a service called Conductor. And it's called Conductor because, like the conductor of an orchestra, it tries to orchestrate the user experience as they move across different platforms. So you could imagine it like this games master or a sort of a puppeteer that sits in the cloud, and it listens to the audience and it tries to send them information at the right time to get them to take them on a journey, really. And so at the heart of our technology is this gaming and storytelling engine. And the way that the game or the experience plays out is dependent on you, the storyteller, or the instructional designer, as it is in the case of an education experience. And we've sold this software, well, people sort of license it, to many different universities. Some use it, sometimes the teachers buy it and they create their own experiences, and sometimes the university buys it and they give it to the students, and the students create experiences. So, for example, in the case of Flinders University in Australia, they use it to teach students about law. So fictional characters will send them emails, and the students respond to these emails that are asking for legal advice, and the conductor will listen to the responses. It will look for certain phrases and replies, and then the story will branch depending on how the student responded to this incoming email. In other cases, for example, in Ravensbourne in the UK and Fontes in the Netherlands, the software is given to the students. So maybe they're on a transmedia storytelling course or interactive narrative course. In Ravensbourne, it's a multi-platform broadcasting course, and the students create their own multi-platform experiences using our software. Now, in today's presentation, I should have started my little timer. Start. So in today's presentation, I'm going to look at the educational projects that we've done over the years. So the company launched right at the very beginning of 2011 with an entertainment project. But very soon we started doing our first educational experience, and I'm going to take you through basically through the years, through the chronology, and I'm going to explain the projects about our process, how we approach these projects, how we think about designing them. And I'll also reflect on the things that we learned along the way. And you'll see that the projects changed based on our experience with the earlier projects. So before I get going too much into that, I thought it was worth having a quick review of what transmedia storytelling and particularly transmedia learning is. So this is a popular diagram that I drew many years ago, and what this is really saying is that transmedia storytelling is telling a story across multiple platforms in a way that they all add up to create a much more satisfying experience for the user. So typically in a Hollywood franchise, somebody would write a book, and then that book would be optioned and turned into a film, and then someone might take the film and turn it into a game. And if you was a fan of the book, you would hate the movie because it's just the same sort of story but not told very well. With transmedia storytelling, the idea is that you take a different perspective on that story world, and so you tell a different story, but maybe using the same characters, for example. Now, with transmedia learning, it's about telling this story across different platforms, but we're thinking much more in terms of the audience experience. And so I've borrowed this definition from Elaine Rayborn. So she works a lot in this area with the Department of Defense in America to help train warfighters, basically soldiers. And she defines transmedia learning as this transformative experience, and that transformation could be, intellectual or behavioural and so on. So it's not necessarily about getting people to pass exams. It's about looking at the whole person and trying to sort of motivate and encourage and reward them for basically learning in a more experiential way. Now, what we say is that we're putting the learner at the centre. So we see the teacher becoming more in the role of a facilitator and a moderator, as a mentor to guide students through their own journey. And with Conductor, of course, we can arrange all these different medias, these different experiences, so that they tell a cohesive story. One way to look at this is, if today education is just, let's say, reading a book, we can sort of twist that book as though it were a cube and see a much more sort of multi-dimensional experience. So we can take an issue and then look at it in many different ways. And what we like to do in our experiences is take the learner on an emotional journey. So we try to look at ways is how can we take this information or this learning point and make it emotional, make it mean something, make it resonate with that learner. So why should anybody care about this? I feel that this transmedia education is a real necessity because we live in completely different times for when the educational system was first designed, and students that are sort of graduating now are coming into an era where there's many more people fighting for much fewer jobs. And if we look at the technological pace, artificial intelligence is going to replace many sort of white-collar jobs. So we saw the sort of mechanical revolution with robots taking place, replacing sort of physical labour. And now we're going to see the same with sort of, let's say, sort of brain workers. And we see that people, we're going to be doing maybe more than just one job, and certainly the jobs will be much more collaborative. And as humans, we need to differentiate ourselves from the machines. And creativity and problem solving and collaboration are the ways that we can do that and find things that we're good at that we don't need to rely on the machines. There's also, I would say, a kind of darker side to this as well, and that is in the area of sort of cyber warfare and hacking and so on. And you can see the roots of this also in, let's say, cyberbullying. A lot of our reality is structured from actually a virtual reality. So people's, especially young people, they see their world as existing on Facebook, for example. And that is only one aspect of reality, and quite often it's very manufactured. And terrorists and people that want to harm us are finding new ways to threaten us through social media and basically just really good storytelling. And so if we want to create more resilient individuals, if we want to create more resilient communities, it's very important that people understand the way that they're manipulated and the way that we can tell these stories and the way that they have an effect on our imagination and on our belief systems. So the work that we've been doing has predominantly been around this sort of OECD report saying that there needs to be more problem-based learning. So the projects we've done have tended to be with students working in groups and solving a problem, and you'll see that unfold. So it was mentioned before, but I'm not going to mention it here, about the work we've done with Game of Thrones for season 4. So we started with a live event, and it sort of continued online on a massively multiplayer role-playing game on Twitter. But I'm not going to talk about that. And I'm not going to talk about the thousands of people that came to see the winner of that online experience crowned the King of the Andals and the First Men. Today, I'm going to concentrate on our educational experiences. So not very long after we launched our first project, which was, it was called Lowlifes, and it told the story of a detective and the detective's family over a book, a web series, and an alternate reality game, basically an online game. And somebody contacted us from Florida in America and said, we'd like you to talk to us about creating one of these experiences for our client. So their client was the Florida Council on Economic Education, and they wanted to teach students about ethics and financial responsibility. And what we created was this project called Cosmic Voyage Enterprises. So in this project, and I'm not going to dwell on this one because this is actually well documented online, and today I've got projects that haven't been seen before because they've kind of been confidential with the client, but now because they're sort of getting older, the client's more comfortable about us talking about them. So what happens in this project is the students are organised into teams of 5, and they role play at being executives of a space cargo company. Now the experience unfolds over 3 weeks, and on day 1, one of their rocket ships crashes into a local village and causes environmental damage. So now the students have to work out, what do we do? How do we resolve the situation? How do we make it right for the company, but also make it right for the community? And so you see here different news reports that come out on YouTube, emails they would get from NASA and different sort of local dignitaries. And the students could interact with characters on Facebook, and the students really took to it. I mean, so this is a fictional character who's role-playing as a Greenpeace activist, and conductor is listening for the reaction from the students and responding back to them. So this is all completely sort of scripted from our side, but the student is reacting quite naturally to it. So the students really took to it, and what we said was, we think we can improve it. And we was lucky enough to move into the next year with another project, which I will start to look at, and this was called T2 Sports. So what we did in this experience is we had a similar setup. Students are in teams of 5. They're executives of a company, but this time it's a sportswear company. Now, in the previous project, we didn't necessarily try to follow any kind of curriculum. We just went with something that we thought would be a lot of fun for the students. But in this, what the feedback from the client, from the Florida Council on Economic Education, was the previous experience focused a bit too much on ethics and not enough on the sort of finances. They wanted to put in some more economics. And they wanted a stronger buy-in from the teachers. So with all of our experiences, they've never been mandated. It's always been optional for the teachers to take part. So after we've written the experience, there's always a kind of sort of sales job or marketing job that's done around the schools to invite teachers to take part. And what we wanted to do this time was to try to make it much more closely sort of dovetailed to the lesson plan. So we took the basically like the learning objectives from the module on ethics, where the students had to look at sort of labour relations and these types of things, and we fitted it around this scenario where they have to decide where to manufacture their next training shoe. So this is going to be a premium training shoe, and were they going to manufacture it in Florida or were they going to outsource it to China? So I don't think there's any sound on this video, but I'm going to play it just to give you an idea of the sort of thing that greets the students. Oh, we can hear it a little bit. So this would be played in the classroom by the teacher to introduce the kind of scenario.
Don't you like being out downtown?
I really do. I mean, it's just
There's a
so
lot
nice.
going on, right?
Okay, you can't hear it very well, but what's happening here is this guy recognises the chap as a rapper, and then he confronts him, and he's saying to him, you know, you think you're a big shot, you're talking about human rights, but those sneakers you're wearing are made with child labour.
Human rights supporter. You even rap about it in your songs. But you're fake, just like the rest.
Who you calling fake? Somebody get this kid.
It's time to go. It's time to go.
Hey, I'm not going anywhere. Record this. Aren't you supposed to be some big human rights advocate?
I am. I ain't no hypocrite.
Those are T2 sports, right? They contract with sweatshops in Asia now. That goes against all things human rights. There's little kids making those shoes. You support that too?
Yo, I ain't got nothing to do with that.
Yeah, right.
Yo, I ain't down with no sweatshops.
Then what are you gonna do about it?
This is what I'm gonna do about it.
So the reason we chose sort of sneakers was it was something that we thought the students could relate to, and obviously the rapping and so on. And so they start the project with this sort of disaster, really. Their top sort of sportsman that was previously endorsed their brand has now sort of trashed it. So what I'm going to do now is take you through some of the sort of design aspects of this experience. The financial model is relatively straightforward. So there's a retail margin, basically how much money they make on the sneaker, times by the sales volume minus the contract price. And the contract price is affected by the negotiation with the manufacturer. So that's their core choice, remember. But the sales volume is affected by public sentiment. So this means if they try to go for the lowest cost manufacturer that has poor labour relations, that affects their sales volume. So where they thought, well, you know, I'll maximise my profit by going with the lowest cost, actually it reduces their sales volume. So you see how we sort of manipulate the learning from the lesson by setting up the right parameters to get the sort of right result, if you see what I mean. So they start with a list of manufacturers, and they're told these different dimensions, you know, what the wages are like for the workers, what the conditions are, the public sentiment and the production quality. Now, what's important in these experiences is that there is actually no single right answer. The point of these projects is the journey towards the answer. And so the students are encouraged to discuss and debate as much as possible, and that's really the real outcome that we want from it, is their decision-making process and how they analyse the data, how do they communicate with each other, how do they resolve conflicts within the teams. Because when they're in different roles, so you'll have the finance guy, you'll have the marketing guy, the corporate social responsibility person, and we might send them different information. So there's nothing to say that they might not speak up, they might not tell their other team members that they're holding some vital information. And what we do, in addition to the sort of financial side of things, is we look at all the stakeholders in this, in this situation, really. And what's good about analysing the stakeholders is that they can each express their opinion in their sort of own words. So you have an investor who has a certain relationship to the business, we have the unions and the suppliers and so on. So working through in this way, we always sort of layer our experiences, and it's very important to us that it's very participatory, very interactive. So we always think about what is it that we're going to get the students doing, not what they're going to learn. Okay, so I've explained this before, a little bit like when you play golf. Not that I'm a big golfer at all, but the idea is that when you're hitting the ball, your concentration is entirely on the ball. And what you need to do is visualize where the hole is. So you look down the range and you see where the hole is, and you hold that in your mind, and then you come down and then you swing for the ball. But while you're swinging for the ball, you're not also thinking about the hole, because you've already visualized that. And it's a bit the same here. So we understand what the learning objectives are. We know what the dots are we need to connect. but then we have to think about the student experience and how do we make it entertaining for them. And I think this is often where the conflict comes between, let's say, us and the sort of teaching staff, because the more entertaining you want to make it for the students, so the more the teaching staff feel like that's a bit too much fun. So that's always a constant conflict for us. And what we do is we look at the different pieces of information that we're sending out, and we give this basically to the client to say, okay, this is information that will illuminate the subject. And this is information that will help them as a discussion point for the teacher, for example. And the key thing for us is the decision points. So this would be how week one would sort of unfold. And I'm showing here there's 2 decisions a week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday. There's key sort of financial data released. And then here are some sort of discussion points. What I think is important is that the decisions have a consequence. And we quite like these kind of models. So at the top, I'm showing whether they accept the Chinese minister's offer or not. So as the story unfolds, they get contacted by a local government official from a Chinese province, and he says, I can make the sort of labour relations very easy for you and take the sort of the regulations out the way if you build your factory here, or if you come and manufacture your sneaker here. And then we have other stakeholders asking them to implement US labour standards. And the students get a choice this way and a choice that way, and we see the impact in the public sentiment, which will affect their sales volume. So what happens is they make a decision, and then they'll get a financial report which shows the consequences of making those decisions. So what did we learn? Well, students absolutely love it, the teachers not so keen. The students love it because they're engaged, they're arguing, they're debating and so on. The teachers, they kind of range really from those who really just don't want to get involved because they've taught the same lesson for the last 20 or 30 years and they can't be bothered to change. But others are keen but nervous. They don't like the fact that the students can run rings around them. Oh, miss, I didn't get the email, my password's got broken, all this type of stuff. And I think the biggest sales job we always have to do is with the teachers to get them to take it on board. And so this was sort of back then. And what I'll show you in the, towards the end of the presentation is how we've come to address some of these issues and really look at it from a teacher's perspective as well, and how can we help them to sort of, unfold these experiences. So around about the same time, towards the end of this project, we were approached by a company in Brazil called MindLab. So MindLab have been very successful at doing sort of educational programs for students that are kind of 7 or younger. And they wanted to investigate transmedia storytelling in the older age groups. They'd heard about the stuff that we'd been doing. So we pitched this idea about unlocking your superpowers, that you would be a time traveller, you, the student, would be a time traveller, and you could see how the decisions you made today would affect your life in the future. Because what MindLab wanted to do was not focus on the curriculum, but focus on the person. How can we give them more self-esteem? How can we make them feel like they're in charge of their own lives? And I think there was an assumption as well that there would be at least one mobile phone in the classroom. So I'm showing here, these are like QR codes. So this was just a very sort of quick demo, because often people don't sort of get transmedia storytelling. They want to see an example of what it might be like that they're going to sort of unleash on the students. So we put together this sort of simple scenario just to set it up and show how students might interact with their mobile phones. And it was quite interesting when we did the project in Florida, with all our projects, whether it's Game of Thrones or if it's educational project, we always think about access to technology. Like, is everybody going to be able to play this game or not? So it's helpful when you're playing in groups, because I think you can assume there's going to be at least one mobile phone in the group. But what we found in Florida was that, there was this big debate about, what if they don't have phones? And the first email that came in was like sent from my iPhone. So, a lot of the students have got the very latest technology, although they're sort of poorer ones as well. So anyway, we won this project. And what we then did was we flew to Brazil, this is me and Belen, and we spent 2 weeks in Brazil being immersed in the research from the client that they'd done about certain topic areas, concerns of the students. So the students were very altruistic. They wanted to change the world. They wanted to impact their community. And so we came up with this idea, this project called This Is Not a Wasteland. And we were in Brazil anyway, so it was set in Sao Paulo. And the idea was that they would take over an abandoned hotel and repurpose it for community use. And this was an idea that Belen came up with, because in Spain at the time there were activist groups occupying buildings and saying, it's a travesty that this building should be left empty. We should be making better use of it. And the idea was that it's your hotel, it's your rules. So we didn't say to them what the community use should be, and that was going to be part of the sort of learning for them to debate in the group about what should we do with it. So we had a cast of thousands. These are the fictional characters, and they all represent different stakeholders that have got something to say about the use of this hotel. The main role for the students was to join this activist group, and in this, so it's a bit difficult to see from there, but it basically unfolds over 4 weeks. And what I'm showing here is how the story will unfold. So even though we give the students autonomy, we still know the major plot points. So there's never any time where the students can make a decision and send it off in a direction that is totally alien to where we want the learning to go. So what happens is, in week 1, they form their teams. In week 2, they basically storm the hotel. So by force, they break into the abandoned hotel and occupy it. And then they get arrested, and then they need to decide, okay, we need a different approach. So then in week 3, they have to negotiate with different members of the community for its use, and then in chapter 4, they get approval and everything comes good. And what I'm showing here are 4 different dimensions to the exercise during that week. So I've got ethical, emotional, social, and cognitive. So what we try to do is create puzzles and scenarios and sort of role plays that would tick these boxes in different degrees depending on, the assignment for that week. So, for example, remember there's no right or wrong answer. And I've come back again to this sort of matrix idea. So I've got young and old on this dimension and rich and poor on this dimension. So here we have a poor young woman, and down here we have a poor older woman. Here's sort of an old rich guy and a younger rich man. And quite deliberately they have conflicting objectives. They have conflicting opinions about what the use case. So the rich guy wants to park his Ferrari and he doesn't want loads of sort of vagrants hanging around, this type of typical, bit caricaturish. The older lady wants it to become a daycare centre, and so on and so forth. And what the students will do is, through the technology, is sort of ask these characters for their opinions, and then they have to try to basically square a circle. They have to try to find out, how do we actually make this all fit so that everyone's happy, or if some people are not happy, they've got, they're not at the extreme. It's up to them how they resolve the situation. I think what's really interesting about this project was that the research we were given said too often parents saw responsibility for education to be entirely the schools. And this was the same across all socioeconomic groups. So like rich families would sort of drop their kids off at the school gates and said, like, right, she's your problem now, or he's your problem now, I'll pay you to educate her, get on with it. And the evidence had shown that where parents take an interest in the student's education, the student always performs better than without that attention. So, I mentioned before that in our games they're very team-based. So here we've got a team of 4 students. The teacher is a 5th member of the team to see what they're doing. But each student was asked to nominate a parent or guardian to be a role in their team. And as the experience unfolded, we sent emails to the parents. So the parent had a role in this activist group, and it encouraged or required the parent or guardian and the student to talk to each other, to share opinions, and then the student would bring that back into the classroom. Now, I was concerned that either the parents wouldn't get into it or the students wouldn't like it, but actually it was really successful. And what was really nice as well is we visited the headmistress of a particular school, and she said, like, it's really good because we've set up like almost like a sort of mini conference where they invited all the parents in and they showed them and explained the experience to them and why it was important for them to take part in this. So they saw it as quite a big community exercise. And the students as well, they were split up across years. So in the previous projects, the students tended to be in teams from their own classroom, but here they could be in different from the years above. So this guy might be in year 3 and he might be in year 2. So it was all entirely down to the headmistress. She wanted to really mix it up to get different perspectives and so on. So it's pretty good. So I'm going to show a video. So this was after the occupation.
Pessoas invadiu o Columbia Palace. Essas pessoas são do cidadão Já, que recupera espaços abandonados para torná-los em lugares para a comunidade. Existem rumores de que eles foram ajudados pelas equipes de ação local para desabilitar o sistema de segurança. Comandante, o senhor pode me dizer o que está acontecendo aqui?
Esses jovens, eles invadiram esse hotel ilegalmente. As pessoas precisam entender que existem regras a serem seguidas e leis a cumprir.
O Hotel Columbia Palace está sob gestão da prefeitura desde que o antigo dono Casimiro Delgado teve que declará-lo falido. Ah, lá está, ofere atrás.
So what's interesting about this? So what's interesting about this is it was shot in London because London's so great. We've got many different nationalities. So we hired a Brazilian producer, and she found loads of Brazilians living in London. And the client was a bit worried about the weather. We go, we're going to find Brazilian weather in London. Don't worry. So we pulled it off. But what's interesting is the budgets don't need to be high in order to get the students to engage with it. So all of this was done quite cheaply, and you don't need to be like a rocket scientist to create some of the puzzles. So for example here we just had animals, and as over the course of the experience they would get these different animals with a code, with a number, and then in someone's bedroom you see this picture on the wall. It's got the habitats of the animals. So when they have to break into the security room and find the code, they try to reason out, well, okay, the ant lives in the nest, the bird lives in the nest, the wasp lives in the sort of wasp nest. So they work out the code. And we created a floor plan for the hotel, which we gave to the students, with different motion sensors. And the idea is they have to communicate to somebody on the ground to get in. So obviously, because they're in the classroom, they're not going to actually go to the hotel. So they have to send instructions to go left, to go right, duck down underneath the motion sensor. And we put this together, there's no audio on this, we put this together in Google SketchUp. So then we were able to give the students a video walkthrough of where they needed to go. So you have to go in, you have to turn off the security system in order to let the rest of the activists into the building. So it's all done quite cheaply, but it's all very effective. It just adds a little bit of sort of mystique that you wouldn't normally get from a book. So the other thing, the other sort of example of sort of puzzles we did is there would be an audio recording. So one of the funny things was we said, it'd be great if the public official was corrupt and so on. And the client was like, that might be a bit too close to the money. we need to soften that a little bit. We can't accuse government officials of being corrupt, so we had to find someone else who's corrupt. And their conversation was recorded, and then what we did was we found an excuse to break up that audio, and we sent different members of the team different clips of the audio, and that meant in the classroom they needed to work out how to synchronize their phones in order to get the continuous sort of audio track. So it's just like, being creative. So there's the hard bit of trying to, tick the educational boxes, and then we get the fun bit of doing this. And typically this is how we'll draw out the user experience. So we're saying it starts with the teacher playing a video, and then it moves to a mobile text message, to email, and so on. That's how we sort of describe it. So far, I've talked about all the sort of educational games that we've done for 11 to 17-year-olds. And I want to show you a project that we did for adults. And you'll see how similar it is.
One person is now dead and 76 have fallen ill due to a nationwide salmonella outbreak.
566 reports of patient deaths related to alarms on monitoring devices.
We will suffer a catastrophic cyber attack.
Breaking news this afternoon, a bomb threat at Link Mining's Circle Mine.
Who's going to write the press release? Who's going to respond to Lynn Holmes?
I can respond to Lynn Holmes. We want to increase the security around the mine, considering that there was a bomb threat.
We're acquiring new information. The military's been deployed. We'll keep you updated.
And they have cameras outside our mine.
It puts a face to the message.
Now that business run on internet time, more and more organizations are looking at preparing their crisis management teams for unexpected events. Organizations that never thought that they'd be dealing with a really public crisis have been hit the last 5 or 6 years. Do you want a real crisis to be the first time your team actually tries to handle a situation that's critical for the organization? I don't think so.
How long has it got? Oh, that's a link, right?
612. Stop prices at 6.
Okay. And I think it would help us if we have those files from Argo.
Working on it.
With the scenario that we've created, it's a very, very dynamic, time-pressured, stressful situation.
So these are MBA students, and they've been sort of trained or learning about crisis communications. So big companies have a crisis team that comes together when something goes wrong, and they sort of work with the press and other stakeholders. And the point of this exercise is to create like a really stressful environment, because often the people that come together don't normally work with each other. And also the roles can be reversed. So you get the CEO who notionally is in charge of the company, but in a particular crisis it might be somebody from the factory that now assumes responsibility for the kind of, what we do next. And that creates a lot of conflict. And what we're finding is that sort of going into the sort of more recent years now, that we've been able to go, there's a lot of similarities between what we've been doing with the students, while they're at school, with what we've been doing with students after they've left school. And we have been working in a lot of this scenario-based training for leadership development and so on. So one of the interesting things, you said, I said before how important it was about future jobs. They're going to become much more collaborative. The students need these kind of negotiation skills and creative problem-solving skills. The guys that we work with in Brazil from MindLab, one of the problems that they foresaw was actually getting accepted by the educational establishment. So while the project was successful and it showed really good results, actually launching that as a business was going to take many, many years. And the guys were so excited about it and impatient for success that they launched their own business called Lifelike. So we are now in partnership with this Brazilian business called Lifelike. They have exclusivity for training applications that run on our technology. And what we created here is a recruitment game. So graduates will answer an online questionnaire, and this sort of filters down to a fewer number of people that then get invited for what would have been an interview. But now they get invited to this sort of collaborative simulation, And the scenario is an Italian restaurant that's run by a family, and different family members have got different points of view about how basically the restaurant's not making money, how the restaurant should be saved. And of course it's a lot more complicated. We've got profit and loss statements, but we have the similar type of thing, Facebook characters, news reports and so on. And the thinking here is that, or what Lifelike say to their clients is people lie on their CV. People on their resume, anybody could say, oh, I'm really good in a crisis. I'm really good with people. And so what this allows the client to do is say, well, let's see that then. Let's get them in. Let's get them working in teams and we'll see it. So this is the start for us of another innovation that we will turn back into the classroom, because the previous experiences, as is often true with our entertainment experiences, is we set up the system and then it just runs automatically. So it runs out over these 3 weeks or 4 weeks, 10 weeks in the case of Game of Thrones, and nobody really wants to touch it. But here, this experience runs out over 2 hours, and there's somebody that's in charge. So rather than the story unfolding based on a date and time, it runs out based on what the facilitator decides should be the next stage of the journey. And what I'm showing here is the facilitator dashboard. So typically, the recruits get brought into a room, and there's 25 of them. They're organised into groups of 5, and the facilitator is basically in control of all of the 5. And then there's an observer per group of 5 people. And the observer has this dashboard. And what happens is, you remember I said with the teachers that the teachers felt, there was a lot of work. They would have to learn about the story. They would need to know what the characters' opinions were. So there's a lot of groundwork they needed to do in order to sort of facilitate this experience. Well, what we've done here is we've contained, so it looks like an app, but it's actually a website that's running from our system. And what happens is the moderators, the observers and the facilitator get told what's coming up next. So it will say, the teams have just been told that Gennaro is embezzling funds, and you should look for these behaviours. You should, look out for people that are displaying or exhibiting these types of traits. And what the observer will do will tick them. So they'll find the person's photograph in the team, and they'll start to tick off certain behaviours and start to score them as this experience unfolds. So it's really effective, and at the end of the 2 hours, all the recruits or would-be recruits go home, and the observers and the facilitator sit down and they look at all of the scores that they've given them in order to rank the people that have come in. So this is an employer, or it's not just one employer, because this is now a service that's available in Brazil. This is where employers are looking for these skills. They want people that can get on with other people, that can resolve conflicts, that can share information and so on and so forth. So it seems like quite a good idea that we should be educating people how to do this while they're in school, because this is something that the employers find very important. So what we did following this was we took the Cosmic Voyage Enterprises that we first launched in 2011, and it's now available online for anybody to sign up. So any teacher can sign up now and run this experience. It's run from our website, and the teacher instead of the big dashboard, they can just run it on their mobile phone. There's no passwords or anything like that for the students. The students log, and it's also completely anonymous. So that means the students can log in with a username or something like that. So there's nothing identifiable about the student that's held in this system. And it's the same idea. So here, you won't be able to see it from that distance, but here it says this is a discussion point. So this is some breaking news that's gone to all the students or certain groups of students. And we have an assistant to the teacher, and it's talking to the teacher to say, you should look out for this, and this is a discussion point. You might want to ask them these questions. And then when they're ready, they can click to continue to day 2. So notionally, it's like a 15-day experience, but those days, the real time that elapses is entirely dependent on the teacher, because that was another problem we had, was fitting it in with different schedules, because the Florida projects and the Brazilian projects run out across the whole of the country, and different teachers have the ethics lesson on different days. So it was very tricky to actually get it to synchronise. Whereas here now, the teacher could decide, well, end of term, it's really, everyone's pretty sort of disruptive and they're not focusing on stuff. So I'm going to run this whole experience for one day because it's under my control. I decide when the story advances. Or they could take the whole of the term, so it's entirely up to them. So I'm going to sort of move back, well, while I'm with the sort of the educational projects, but while I'm with the sort of the 11 to 17-year-old projects, but I'm going to look at the sort of area of metrics and data analysis and so on. So something that was launched by Lifelike last year was this idea of a travelling band of activists that would stop and help sort of solve local problems. So they're travelling across Brazil, and this one fits in with a particular book. So the students have to learn a book as part of their studies. And what happens is this gang, it's like a group of sort of do-gooding sort of teenagers, look at sort of bullying in the context of this sort of stolen book. And what happens in these experiences is sort of mirrors the experience in the book. So it's still opt-in. The teachers don't have to sign up for this. But what you'll notice, I'm going to play this video. You'll notice in the video it's much slicker, it's higher production values now.
Oi, meu nome é Pedro, eu tenho 22 anos e eu ganhei do meu pai uma Kombi irada. Irada, é uma Kombi antiga, mas que eu tenho muito carinho por ela, que é a Dona Palmira. Eu rodo pela cidade em busca de causas que são importantes para você. Para vocês jovens, todos. Mas eu não posso fazer esse trabalho sozinho, eu preciso da ajuda de vocês. Eu conto com a sua ajuda, para juntos a gente fazer um mundo melhor. Esse é o bonde da ação. Tamo junto?
Deixa eu dar uma guinda aqui. Deixa eu ler esse livro aqui rapidinho. Qual é, rapaz? Vai ler esse livro aí, cara. Eles são da minha escola e vêm no mesmo ônibus que eu. Eles vão comigo direto, todo dia. Não aguento mais.
Galera, essa é uma causa com a nossa cara. Imagina quanta gente tá por aí passando por isso, não é? A gente vai lutar contra todo tipo de bullying nas escolas, qualquer tipo de bullying. E a gente vai chamar a galera do Eleva pra ajudar a gente nessa. E aí, tamo junto ou não tamo?
Ei, deixa eu falar, tô dando tchau pra infância, pois já não sou mais criança. Vou te explicar, eu tenho pressa, muita pressa, tenho muito o que fazer. Coração cheio de amor.
So you see quite a lot of effort goes into like selling it to the teachers to say to them this is going to be really exciting and so on. So it's not just in a way we don't really need to influence the students because they like it. I mean, you just have a cool guy and so on and so forth. And what's really good about this is it really is a travelling van, so it's completely transmedia. So the star of the show actually turns up. It's like a sort of teen soap opera that's designed around these educational experiences, and they actually turn up in the classroom. And it's quite exciting. I mean, like Lifelike have got videos of the guy turning up and all the kids going, he's turned up. So it's really good. And but the reason I talk about this one is to look at the metrics. So what we're able to do is look at basically one of the things we've been sort of trying to explore is how can we tell if the students are really engaged? Because this work was financed by a potential investor that saw that there's a big opportunity. They've got much deeper pockets than we would have as a sort of smaller companies. But, you need to give me evidence that this is having sort of an impact on learning and so on. And this is just showing that we can look at each individual student and find out how many times they've logged in, what sort of things they're doing. But one of the interesting things we found was when we looked at activity by classroom, and you can see that where the teachers are really up for it and engaged, there's much greater engagement with the students as well, because more sort of lesson time is made available for it. Whereas when the teachers are less engaged, then you see that the students kind of sort of slack off a little bit, I guess. So, I think that's quite interesting. But also it means that if you're the headmaster, you can actually approach these teachers and say, how comes we're not doing more about it? So the final conclusion was that they ran a test group that wasn't using, that didn't have this sort of transmedia experience. And, there's quite a big margin there of people that saying they would recommend this course, that would, they would do it again if they had a chance to do it. So it's, I think it's a very successful thing. To me, it feels like a no-brainer. And the biggest problem is really the organisational side of it and getting the teachers to embrace it. So on the metrics, this is an adult sort of demonstration that we did. It's kind of like one of those choose your own adventure stories. So you phone up this number and it says a friend of yours has got stranded in this sort of mountain resort because his car broke down, and now you have to help them get to safety. So this experience is a single player and it plays out over 15 minutes. And what I'm showing in this diagram is the different states or different places that you can be in this game. So you start inside a chalet, sort of a ski chalet, and you have the choice to go outside. And once you're outside, you could go back into the chalet or you could continue on. If you continue on, you go into a car. And once you're in the car, you could wait in the car or you could drive away. And what this is showing is a heat map for the different decisions that people make. So the darker the colour, the more popular that choice is. So you can see that in the chalet, most people chose to sort of stay inside rather than go outside. And of those that got to the car, fewer people decided to drive away. Now, while you're playing, although it starts with a telephone call and you get a text message, there's also a weather report. There's also a website for the chalet. And if you do your research, you'll learn that there's an avalanche coming. So you really should get out. So even if you get the wood that's outside and you go back into the chalet and start the fire to keep warm, ultimately you're going to die because the avalanche wipes out the thing. And the point here is that you should, take stock of your situation before you start leaping to conclusions. And each person that plays through this gets an individual survival report. So we compare, we say this was your first decision to stay inside. Overall, 46 people also chose to go outside. And then you get feedback from an expert or feedback from us, and then what the experts say, so some kind of learning lesson from that. So it's very tailored to your experience. You get to reflect on the choices you made. You get told, what someone else would have done. And we can get very detailed experience tracking. So we can see inside the experience where it's not working, where people are getting stuck. And we can learn from people playing it how to improve the game to make it better. So I'm going to start to wrap up and look at some of the stuff we've been working on recently, just a quick sort of tour. So last year we created this connected crime scene. So there was an initiative, I would say it was a global initiative that was launched by Lance Weiler, and it was called Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things. So it was to take the Sherlock Holmes stories and look at Internet of Things. And the idea was that there was a crime scene, and what we did was we introduced the idea of these NFC tags. So these are just sort of like little chips on a sticker, and you can put codes onto the sticker which reveal certain information when you scan them. So people, most people are familiar with crime scenes, and what we wanted to do was look at, could we use this to teach chemistry, or at least introduce the idea of some chemistry. So in addition to scanning the tags, you could also scan these different experts, and the expert would give you an opinion on the stuff that you'd uncovered. And so this was a box, a physical box that I created, and inside is an Android tablet. And it's sort of been, rendered to try to fit in with the box. So the idea is you've got this sort of sacred object that you can use to go along. So that's one thing that we did. I don't know if there's anybody here like sex games. This was a Mexican sex game. It was to encourage men who have sex with other men to get tested for HIV. And what we could do is when people registered, we put them into different groups, and kind of randomly, but each group had a different game mechanic. Now, when they went to get checked up, if they did get checked up for HIV, the doctor got a one-time use code that they gave to the patient, put that in their phone, and we can now track the effectiveness of the game mechanics with people actually getting checked up for HIV. So we're, again, starting with stuff that's online and going into the real world. We're working now with Al Jazeera on a serious game about cyber warfare. It's quite interesting. And we've just finished this project with the Ministry of Defence, and I'm going to look to try and sort of wrap up things with this. So I'm going to play the video, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we've done, and you'll see how the educational stuff is coming together. So what we've done is we've connected wearable devices that are measuring heart rate and position and such like, and connected it into our conductor platform. And the facilitator terminal that we had in the classroom, we've created like a military version for exercise instructors, and it works like a personal assistant. So they like to feel like they're in control. And what it does, it will prompt them. And it will say, like in the example here, the team is ahead of schedule, they're doing very well. And what the instructor wants to do is load a bit more pressure onto them so they really get the best learning experience. Because if it's too easy, then they're not learning anything. So, he can inject some more difficulty into the exercise. And what we saw as well was the idea that the individual person had this learning buddy. So after the exercise, they can review their performance, and it will show also like times when they were stressed, and it can compare when they were stressed with other people's sort of stress level at that time. And if the instructor makes they can sort of tag certain behaviours if they observe it, and that can also go into someone's record to review later. And something that we're pitching now to the Ministry of Defence is to create this instruction overlay. So remember, this is not intended to be a learning management system. It's all about creating immersive scenarios. So there could be a learning management system somewhere else, and this is like an experience that sits below that. But what we've got is a situation where people are running simulators, so they're wearing virtual reality headsets or in some kind of simulated environment, and the instructor is able to affect that simulated environment. Now, we've actually done that before. So we did this game that was to raise awareness about homelessness, and people could interact with characters online on social media and text message. And when they went to the live event, this is running, it's like an Oculus Rift, it's running virtual reality software. The system will look at Conductor and find out what it knows about the way this person has played the game, and then it renders a different 3D environment based on the choices made previously. So everybody gets a different virtual experience based on how the choices they made previously. And what we see is that the whole area of sort of learning and education is completely blowing outside the classroom. And there's opportunities now to take these virtual reality experiences that people could have at home, and with this sort of personal learning companion, start to connect all the dots. So you might, say for example, the British Museum did this sort of citizen science project where they asked people to trace these artifacts, and then what happened is all the tracing of the artifacts were turned into 3D models, so you could then put on virtual reality headsets and look at like a spearhead and these types of artifacts. Now it could be that if you then went to see the museum, the personal learning companion would say to you, that spearhead that you created virtually is in this room physically, so why don't you navigate your way to actually see it in real life. And in fact, we've got this whole concept for connected learning that ties in the classroom with historic sites, that ties in with the personal learning companion. And what we're really trying to do is maintain engagement by continually personalising people's learning experience. And however, you can make this as automated or as kind of manual as you wanted. So the teacher or the facilitator could sort of sit in on this at any point in this sort of connected journey. So I'm going to wrap up now, and I'm just going to mention a project that if anyone's interested to take this forward, we'd be interested to talk to you about it. So we'd like to do a project on cyberbullying, and we've come up with this idea of a secret society around a school called the Shadow Shell. And we want it to be quite sort of dark and aimed at teenagers, so the teenagers really get it and they don't feel like it's educational software and a little bit lame, because if their parents like it, they're not going to be so attracted to it. And what we can do is make sure that the pace of the game is completely under the control of the teachers. It unfolds in these 3 chapters and you get these different experiences. But what's interesting is that we look at different types of cyberbullying. So cyberbullying coming from sexual orientation, from appearance, from ethnicity. And we can take the player through lots of different roles. So they start off being bullied, but then they become a bystander, and they can even become a bully, and see how this affects their relationships with others, see it affects their future outcomes. And we've created this sort of little happiness model, because we think it would be a good idea to sort of show students, or anybody really, what makes you happy and what doesn't make you happy. And we've taken these 3 levels of sort of motivation. So the intrinsic motivation comes from connectedness, competency, and autonomy. And so we're showing that all this good stuff comes into this happiness store, but if you show a lack of gratitude, if you don't recognise that you have a good life, if you don't recognise the good things, it just drains away. So all this worry and stress is completely self-defeating and of your own making, and completely in your imagination normally. And then at the top we have external events that might cause sadness, and it's how you react to that. Can we get students that are much more resilient, that have more grit, that are more compassionate at the same time? And we would create this like a game. So you could see this sort of happiness bar, and your objective in the game would be to maximise the level of happiness. But the way you did that was by completing these different tasks, and you got different points for sort of self-esteem, connectedness, connection, and so on. So I think here we've got a really good idea, but we don't have any resource. We're not a studio to develop it ourselves. And I thought this was a good forum. This is something that we've sort of been developing, over the years on the back burner. Every time we get a little break, we return to this and sort of develop our ideas a little bit further. And we feel like we've developed it enough now. We've thought about doing a Kickstarter project, but strategically that's not really the right thing for us, because I don't want us to become a studio. I want us to stick to doing the technology, which is where I think we're best suited. So I'm going to finish on this page of conclusions. I think what really makes our projects engaging is that we give the power to the learner. So I said there, like, learners love autonomy. The more that we can make it participatory and the more that we can personalise it, so the more they get out of it and the more everyone benefits. I kind of feel like the breakthroughs in this area are going to come from outside of the system. I feel like working with the system is too slow. It's like kind of swimming through treacle. And if we can create experiences on the outside that parents or individual teachers that are kind of self-motivated see this as a good opportunity, can sort of pull down and use in the classroom, that's likely to be the faster route to getting this type of thing adopted. And, the things that we can do with performance assessment and measurement now is incredible. And I think most people will be familiar with it, with these wearables, checking their fitness regimes and stuff like this. But it's coming into the classroom slowly and surely, and it's certainly going to come into the corporate environment. So now's the time to look at, what are the ethics of that? How long do we hold that data? Who's accountable for it, and so on. And I think one way to address the issue of sort of data privacy, data security, and so on, is to make the learner responsible for their own data. So they could carry their data with them, so it's not held by somebody else. And as they go from experience to experience, they plug in, and the system can look at what their previous experience has been and what their interests are and what their knowledge is, and adapt the training experience based on the information given to us at that time. We don't need a central repository necessarily. We can just work with the data that the learner gives to us. And I think the final conclusion really is that if we can create these experiences, it really does deliver transformation. It's not just learning information and going away and saying, oh yeah, I passed that exam. It's about feeling better about yourself and feeling like that you're able to survive in a changing world. Thank you very much.
It's not working? Yeah. So thank you so much for this impressive presentation. It was very, very interesting. Now is the time of the questions. If anyone has any question, please, it's the moment. No question? Yes.
Hi. I would like to know how you ended up doing all this.
Yeah.
That's my question. I mean, what have you studied, and what did you before you were doing all this, How,
okay.
What is your background? Yeah?
So, well, I'll start. I'll start right from the early days. So my parents, my dad's a postman and my mum's a school dinner lady. And I grew up in East London in a borough called Newham, which is, officially a deprived borough. But I think the difference was that my parents were very aspirational for me. And they always said that education was the way to get out of Newham. So I've always been attracted by science and the arts, and I always wanted to be a graphic designer, and my dad said, I'm not having you sitting around the house in dungarees. You're going to get a proper job. You're going to become an engineer. So I got a proper job. I left school at 16 and I worked with Ford Motor Company as an apprentice doing mechanical engineering, but I was really interested in computing, and so I did evening classes in microelectronics, and then I went to university, and my degree is in computing. And during the 90s, I worked in telecommunications. So I worked as a marketing consultant in the telecoms industry. And around about 2000, just before the first internet bubble burst, I quit and I went to film school because I felt like, well, I'm a bit older now, I can stand up to my dad, and I want to do something more artistic than the engineering stuff. So I went to film school. I've made 2 feature films. One is available in Spanish. And so that was between 2000 and 2008. And then in 2008, my wife got an opportunity to work in America. And what I saw with the film industry is that the internet was completely revolutionizing everything. I mean, the internet was changing telecommunications, it had changed music, and it was changing films and publishing. And I thought, well, how do we protect creative people? How do we create new business models if their content can be easily distributed and shared and so on? And I thought, well, experiences. You can't really pirate an experience. You have to be there to get that experience. And when I sort of arrived in San Francisco, I started working for this company as a marketing director, and it was interesting enough. But then I left, and my wife encouraged me to set up this business to start developing Conductor. And Alexei, one of the guys at this company I first started working with, he left as well. And so the 2 of us formed Transmedia Storyteller, was the company at that time, to develop basically an entertainment platform to create experiences. I don't know if you've seen the film The Game with Michael Douglas. There's this sort of alternate reality game. So that was our sort of inspiration to become this sort of company where anybody could live the life that they dreamed. So if you wanted to be James Bond, you could sign up to be James Bond, and we would send you messages from sort of MI5, MI6 and these different things. And what we've found is that it can be quite expensive to create these experiences. And so the one we did for Game of Thrones was, it's incredibly expensive, but it only runs for 10 weeks. Whereas the educational projects, they are actually very fulfilling, they're very rewarding emotionally, and they run for much longer. So you create something that has a longer shelf life and more people benefit from it. So that's how we've sort of like got into that. And I think we ignored the training side for a long time, and suddenly we sort of woke up one day and said, we've got a lot of instructional designers using our software. We should probably really take a closer look at this market. Look at our successes, the things we've done. A lot of them have been in education, and we've always been saying to ourselves, we're doing entertainment. But now we see that all that we learned about engaging audiences, we can apply to the educational space, and it's really sort of coming off. So that's the journey. Belen. It's not a plant.
Hello. So what do you think should happen for more transmedia experiences to get into school or into the system? What needs to change? People, the system, what can we do so more of these experiences get to the students?
I think, so what can people do? Let me answer that by starting with some observations. So I feel like often people put a lot of trust in the technology, and the technology can work, but you have to have the right sort of tutor, the right process, the right story behind it. And it was interesting recently, I went in to pitch an experience to a museum, and they said, oh, we've done apps, they don't work. It's like, well, that's like listening to music, a record, and going, you don't like that record, and going, music, it's rubbish, it'll never catch on. And so I think a lot of schools, they buy loads of iPads, and then they're just down to really dull e-learning type projects. And they're not thinking experientially, they're not taking a different look at it. So firstly, I would say adopt our outlook, the way that we see transmedia storytelling. And then I think it is having to sell in to the parents, and there's all these other stakeholders that are really the inertia that prevents the students from benefiting from it. So I think there's a big pressure. I talk to my sort of circle of friends who are parents, and they're obsessed with their kids getting grades. And I'm saying to them, that's just the table stakes. I mean, when we look at employing people, we look at their CV, okay, yeah, they got their degree, that's great. So have thousands of other people. And what else can they offer? And I think it's that other side of developing the full person that's missing from school life right now. And you know, as the world is developing, they're the things that are really going to make the difference. So I think that, and you know, I see it in the paper in England, people complaining about mobile phones being in classrooms. I mean, that would be the equivalent of when I was at school saying calculators shouldn't be in the classroom. And now it would be absurd not to have a calculator in the classroom. And I think the mobile phone offers so many opportunities, but it's working together to decide what's the best use for it. And so what if the kids can access Facebook or videos? You know, we should be finding ways to incorporate that into, I mean, if you look at Assassin's Creed, for example, that's an amazing game. You get that and you can wander around sort of Paris at the time of the revolution, and it's incredibly detailed. That's a work of art, and it's completely educational as well. You can go into this old barn and see a barrel maker, and as much as they try to do it, you know, it's sort of historically authentic. So you've got students that have access to this type of technology, and they come into the class, and it's like being in prison. It's like being put into a straitjacket, and it has, you know, so we need to find more examples or more opportunities to run these sort of trials or case studies where we can actually demonstrate the success of these sort of alternative way of thinking. That's why it tends to be sort of private schools or independent schools that have got that freedom outside of the educational system. Or, you know, sort of on the side of it that make the progress. And I think for us, we could create tons of these experiences, but it comes down to what's the price point. So we can do it so that it's very cheap per student, but to actually make it in the first thing takes some money. And it's not necessarily the production, it's really the thinking and trying to make sure that, again, all the stakeholders are satisfied with it. It's trying to make sure that this is going to appeal to everybody. So yeah, so what should happen next? I think there needs to be more innovators. There just needs to be some teachers that get together with parents to say, we think the system is broken, we would like to change it, and we're going to run this and show you how it could be different. Because otherwise you could tell people, but they're not going to get it as much as just showing them the evidence.
Hi. First of all, I would like to say that your work is impressive.
Thank you. It's not just me, it's a team.
I know. Your team's work. I'm acquainted with your work. You were saying, and you present experience that can be implemented in schools. But my question is, and I think that is the big challenge, is a teacher able to create a transmedia experience in your perspective? And if that is possible, and we are talking about low cost or zero budget, what would be the basic toolkit for a teacher to implement a transmedia experience for their students according to their students' needs?
Yeah, I mean, so in many ways you might say they're already familiar with the concept of transmedia, but they just don't know that term. So when you go on school trips to the museum, when you ask people to bring artifacts in from grandparents, all these types of things, they're trying to get the students engaged in a way that's outside of the book. And what we've because we're a technology company, what we've been looking at is how can we sort of not necessarily streamline, but how can we put that onto a more sort of easily distributed basis and so on. I think there are kits. I know that there's, I don't know if you're familiar with these escape room experiences, but they basically you'll get locked in a room and you have to try and collaborate to get out of it. There's somebody in the States that's created like an escape the classroom kit, and there's a shopping list of stuff, and you can buy it locally, and then you give it to the students to sort of problem solve, and it teaches them different things about physics. So they need to understand that if they set light to this or blow a sort of a wind at this sort of thing, it will turn and so on. And I think we've tried to do the same with our Cosmic Voyage enterprises. I think that there are some teachers that really enjoy this. They've got other interests outside of just the school system, and they kind of use that sort of hacker mentality to create educational experiences. But it's the same with our, say, like even with our Ministry of Defence projects. You have instructional designers who know about how to create the experiences, and then the instructors that know about people and how to get the best out of them. And I think it will be probably the same. So the teachers, we need to give them the tools. So it's not always that the teacher, I don't always see the teacher creating the experience, because it takes a lot of sort of other knowledge that they might not have to create something that's properly engaging and ticks all the boxes. But we should be giving them the tools that says, you know, if you pull these levers, you're going to get this result. And if you do these, so it's almost like a toolkit. As I described the break out the room physical thing, we can do something in a digital space which is kind of equivalent. It's quite easy to customize stuff. So you could have like a universe, so like that thing in Florida, you could easily sort of translate it into Girona. You could change the language, you know, certain things that are appropriate, that would resonate with people in Florida. You can have those as sort of placeholders. And then whenever you translate it to another classroom on another part of the world, you say, right, well, those placeholders I'm going to change. So this here is asking me for a local monument, so I'll type this in. This here is asking me for the name of a local bus company. I'll type that in. So when it plays out for the students, it looks completely customised and tailored and relevant, when actually it's the same framework as someone else is playing, but it's tailored for them.
Thank you, Mr. Bratton. Good morning for everyone. Deeper in this sense, how important is the story world in the way you create an experience? I mean, for example, if you can just customize by locate, by changes, characters, or these kind of things, or you need also to get deeper into the story, for example, to change the subject. I mean, your project are broad to any kind of subject, but if you need something, for example, to maths class or for socials or these kind of things, you can use the same model, the same transmedia experience?
Well, we always, the stories are really important, because the stories are the way that we make sense of the world anyway. So we're not used to random sort of facts. So I think part of the design of an educational experience is to tell a story that connects these facts in the way that we think will be relevant and get and achieve the sort of learning objective. And I think today's youth, even if it's not us as well, we appreciate authenticity. So the more that we can create rich characters, the more authentic it will feel. Because if they push at the edges and we see that this is actually just a two-dimensional stooge of a character that's just there to be the mouthpiece of some, you know, particular organisation, it's less convincing. So what we try to do is avoid things being completely black and white. And to do that, it means you need a rich character that's got strengths and weaknesses. So even if they're proposing an alternative viewpoint, they do have actually some strong points, so they properly get debated. So at the moment, well, what we've tried to do with the Brazilian project is to create a story world which is rich enough for lots of different education experiences. So now we've got the sort of, it's almost like a soap opera of the kids travelling across Brazil in the Volkswagen car. We've established them now. People will be familiar with them, with their ideals, what they do. And then it's much easier to send that wagon to like a different part of the country that's got a different issue. And so you can, you know, this is what Game of Thrones does. It's got a central cast of characters, you establish the families, and then you send them into different challenges. So yeah, I think it is important. Hello.
Okay, I would like to know if transmedia, maybe for the sectors of education or another areas, could be a little bit complicated to understand. So do you think that we need some kind of manual to make transmedia in each sector, or it needs to be a general manual of transmedia?
So what we've done with this experience is we've packaged everything together. So there's a teacher guide which doesn't talk about transmedia, but it talks about this experience. And a lot of the schools, we found, block off social media, so they don't want the students sort of learning about the real world while they're at school. So what we do here is we have this closed user group, like private social media, private email. So although notionally they're looking at something that looks like a phone, they click to read email, but it's actually all self-contained in the phone. So we've been trying to make it easier for teachers, and the teacher guide, it just teaches them about this experience, and it says, you know, this is how it works in the classroom. And I think if we did it scenario by scenario, because, you know, we benefit from the physics that's inside a computer, but we don't need to understand the physics in order to use the computer. And I think it might be the same with this. We can help the teachers in terms of what they do best, which is facilitating learning, and say these are new tools that help you do this job better, but you just do it differently. So you don't have to be the font of all knowledge. You know, the knowledge is out there. We just need we need to develop inquiring minds to go out and find that. And so that's our sort of message in this game. You could go and download it. We can make the link available to everyone, and there's a trial, so you can download the teacher guide and see, you know, how we're sort of approaching this problem.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? Basically, the thing is, I don't think we need to teach teachers about transmedia. It's more like a different teaching style, so that they don't, because otherwise they get the tool and they're still trying to be in charge. But it's not about them being in charge, it's about the students being in charge and them trying to facilitate the group work.
So you propose to make the transmedia and just in education, but to apply this to another areas, they need to maybe to understand transmedia in other ways.
What other audiences do you mean?
Areas. I mean areas to apply transmedia. For example, in
areas?
branding. Yes. For example, in branding or in science fiction or in another area.
I think all of those areas are already affected by transmedia. So, you know, in each sort of group is already looking at this, because that's the nature of our lives now. You know, it used to be there was only like 1 or 3 TV channels. Now there are like hundreds, plus all the stuff that's online. And so whether you work in marketing or education, actually getting a message across is becoming increasingly more difficult. So every industry is finding that the sort of all these different channels of communication, you know, how do we coordinate all of those? How do we sort of bring them all together to get a consistent message? It's the same for everybody. Yeah, I know they are. I mean, yeah, I mean, like I think most people understand transmedia storytelling as telling a story across different channels. And I think what's different about our approach is, okay, that's just sort of like the base level of understanding of what transmedia is. And we take it up a notch, but say it's about creating meaningful experiences, because we come in contact with these different channels at different times. So it could be like on a commute to work, or it could be like in the evening after dinner. And what we want to do is see, okay, throughout the day or throughout someone's life, how can we create a much more meaningful experience for them, so that they get engaged with whatever the topic is. So it could be engaged with a Game of Thrones or engaged with chemistry. But the actual principle is more or less the same, actually.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the great lecture. Sorry. I'm a biology teacher, and in Cyprus we coordinate a project to how to promote different subjects about health, cyberbullying and internet addiction, alcoholic addiction, drugs addiction, anorexia, and stuff like that. Do you think that you can help us?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, I will touch it.
Thank you.
We'll talk together. Thank you very much.
Stop here. And I think, yes. And we have right now the coffee break, so we will come back later.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much to Mr. Brother.